Hi, this is Jim Steinmeyer, and it's March 2025. I'm here with the Genii Speak, welcoming you to the March issue of Genii and our video component. We have a really busy, packed issue this month, and I invite you to spend some time with it. You're going to find it full of magic, full of interesting features, new personalities, some old friends, and we're going to use this video aspect to talk a little about all of those things. Um, what I've done is I've organized this around two kind of brief interviews that are coming up. First, we're going to talk to John Gaughan, and John is back in with Chamber of Secrets, a longtime column that he's been running in Genii. The Chamber of Secrets this month is an amazing one. It's about the famous light and heavy chest of Robert-Houdin, a legendary prop that I think transcends just magic props and has worked its way into the history of magic. A lot of fascinating stories about it, some misinformation about it, but here's your chance to actually see the real light and heavy chest and to talk about how it was made and why it was made and what it did. So we'll start with that video, and then afterwards we're going to talk to Noah Levine. Noah's all through this issue in March. We've got an amazing issue full of magic, and I want Noah to introduce some of that to you and tell you about how these pieces of magic are coming into our magazine and why they are coming in. And I think you'll enjoy those stories as well. So enjoy the magazine, enjoy the videos, and we'll see you next month. Thanks. So here we are with Genii Speaks, and we're coming to you from the actual Chamber of Secrets, that column that you've been reading in Genii for years and years. And this is the room, this is the place, and there's the guy, John Gaughan. And if I were a little closer right now, I would be probably have driven in and I'd be sitting in that chair next to him, which is really tempting because, of course, all those beautiful artifacts and all that wonderful magic all around it. But we're doing this by Zoom so that everyone can see it. And there in front of him is, in fact, the light and heavy chest. Right, John?
Robert-Houdin, yes.
Yeah.
And here it is. Randy Pritchford, of course, acquired this through Gabe's Potter and Potter auction several years ago, and we've been working on it and cleaning it up. And actually, last night, for the first time, we did a demonstration in a little playlet at the Magic Castle, and this was for the departure, the leaving of Richard Kaufman. So it was a great evening. It was had by all, as they say.
And it worked perfectly. Not that there's a lot of taxing things involved in it working, but it worked perfectly, lived up to its name,
Yes.
was very deceptive, and that is saying something because it was built in, we don't really know, but I think we think it was built in around 1846, 1847, right at the beginning of Robert-Houdin's career.
Probably, yeah. I know that Antonio, the trapeze performer, was built in 1848.
Okay.
And so that makes sense that this would show up a little bit earlier.
If you read, and in the column this month that John did, he talks about the prop. He offers beautiful photographs of the chest, and Dustin Stinnett writes with John and Jeff a really, really wonderful little brief history of the trick and where it all came from and how it was developed and where it ended up. But Robert-Houdin did it early in his career. He did it in Paris, actually, as the light and heavy chest, as a chest that would become heavy. And that's what he said it was. And he demonstrated it for his Parisian audiences. And it wasn't a big hit in his show then. But the reason we talk about it now is because, of course, he took it to Algeria and included that in that show. And so it had a starring role in that, at least according to Robert-Houdin. It was a feature. And it's been memorialized since then, probably exaggerated since then as well. But nonetheless, here is the chest that was built. So, John, it's basically wood, right? I mean, that's
Right.
what the
Yeah.
audience
It's a nice French mahogany, kind of like the woods that you would use on the dashboards of exotic cars back in the 20s and 30s. So it's a fine wood. And the hardware is unusual in that the hooks that he used here, rather than doing one that goes this way and one that comes back that way, they're both aimed the same way. So that's kind of unusual. But of course, there's so much up force on here. These catches have to be the real worker here, because as we know, this is the device that clicks it on down to the table is an electromagnet, not any catches or anything that snuck out of the bottom. And so from here to the bottom here, the old adage, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. Right. Well, there are a lot of weak links in this thing down here. The handle and the wood joinery, even all the way down to there's a steel plate down in the bottom. This thing weighs a lot.
It's heavy, even when it's light. It's heavy. Yeah.
Yeah, and so this attaches to the wood, attaches to the bolts that go through here. So that means that those holes in that soft mahogany have to be strong, or they're still tight.
Right.
And while we got this thing upside down here, you can see the original Circus Museum inventory list. That was before. That was when all the equipment was given to the Circus Museum. And then next to that is after Ken Klosterman bought this, there's his inventory number down there too. So there's a little bit of the history in the chest, and it's had many other owners. I think Willard Smith was who Ken got it from, and then it goes back several generations before that.
And it was it through De Vere, do you think, in Paris that came? Because we don't know exactly where it came from Robert-Houdin, what that went.
I have some letters or copies of letters from Charles De Vere to Houdini, right, where Charles De Vere, when he had his magic shop in Paris, he's offering him a list of Robert-Houdin's pieces, and this was in it, or a light box, maybe. But anyway, the light and heavy chest was on that list, and possibly Houdini bought it from Charles De Vere.
Yeah. It's interesting that, as simple as it is, and you know what, obviously the headline and the reason it's interesting historically is that we used a principle that was relatively new at the time, electromagnetism. It had
electricity, even,
right. But you make a really interesting point, which is that it still had to be very cleverly made, very solidly made, because that idea of having people pull on it, with a kind of light handle, all giving you the impression that it's an ordinary box. It takes quite a beating to be able to do that.
Yeah, regularly. Even here you can see the huge hinges put in here. So if this was just a jewelry box, they wouldn't need to use anything like that.
Right, right.
Here I am opening it up again and showing you more of the inside, right, and you can see the hinges and how beefy they are.
Right.
Because these are just wood screws, but they're fairly long, metric, of course, over there, but they're about 1.5 inches long, and so they dig in to hold all the parts and pieces together here.
Right. It's interesting because I when I was writing about it in the column, what's interesting about what you're doing, and in this video, here's a graphic example of it, is that we see things that very often aren't the things that are photographed. We're really good in the magic world of talking about the apparatus, but we always photograph it in the idealized way. And,
Yes.
here's the real thing. Here's the not only the real prop, but here's the secrets you have to take into account is how it's made and what the hardware is like and how he was disguising certain elements in it when he was building it. And that little handle is a gimmicky little handle because we think that it's at one point that delivered a shock to the person that was lifting it.
Yeah, that's kind of what's going on here.
Mhm.
And you can, no, you can't see.
There's a little element to it that there's an extra little portion of the handle
Yeah,
that creates a second
yeah.
connection.
Here's a second level of brass here,
Mhm.
and it's adhered attached to the handle itself, but there is a layer of insulation in there. So you have, if you're going to be shocked, you of course need to get the both sides of the battery, and you hold here, and when you touch that, that's when you get the electricity into your body.
Right.
So that's kind of cleverly made right there, and pretty well hidden out of the way. But the handle itself is kind of unusual here, just with this plate on here. There's a switch right here,
Mhm.
and we still do not know quite how this it slides back and forth here. And so if you're holding it, you can push it forward, back and forth like that. But we haven't dug deep enough into the electronics here to figure out what that does other than turn on the shocker.
Right.
And maybe it turns off the
Magnet.
the batteries
Yeah.
that bring this down to here, or does the electromagnet in the table, it adheres to the bottom of this thing. There's all sorts of stuff going on in here.
Right.
And this thing was restored by a friend of Ken Klosterman's named Carl Williams. And Carl was a real expert in electronics and worked over at Lockheed in the Skunk Works. And so he was, I think he incorporated a lot of Lockheed's technology into here that wasn't in there when Robert-Houdin built it, let's say.
Right. Obviously there was a version of this from the 1850s, and then there was a version of it that was cleaned up.
And at this point, it's so many digitally printed circuit boards and all that stuff in all there, because Carl didn't bother to keep it original.
Right. Right.
Even if you see the early pictures of this thing, it had a beautiful veneer on it from a different era, and Carl completely took all that off, unfortunately.
Yeah. If people look at the at your column in March, they'll see really wonderful close-up images of it. I know now you're sitting in a room and waving your hands around it, but there's some really beautiful photography. It shows you the hardware, shows you the nature of that handle, and also some historical drawings that show it kind of in action. At least imagine.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah. Dustin is doing a good job on getting all that together.
Yeah. Well, what do you do? What do you do for next month? You close your eyes and swirl around the room and point, and then open your eyes and see what you're pointing at.
I wish I could do that.
How do you decide on the next piece?
Well, we got a half a dozen in the background, and
right.
And depending on how big it is, and we've got to, the shop is not very, let's say, tidy out there, and so to photograph things, we have to get seamless paper out and all of the accoutrements of a photography studio. Even though we kind of don't know what we're doing when it comes to photography, so it's good to hear and now and then that the pictures look good.
No, and they're really something. I mean, people who obviously have been reading magic books, historical magic books, and books about apparatus appreciate this. They're really photographed in interesting ways, so that we're talking about technical aspects of a trick, and it's all that stuff you knew was there, but you didn't quite understand. And I know John's interest, having worked with him for years, is primarily, well, wide in the field of apparatus. But I mean, I know your fondness is for wood, and kind of the grades of wood and the way stuff's turned and how that all interfaces with things. And so it's always interesting seeing kind of the quality of it, the craftsmanship of it, the artistry of it with the mechanics and how those things all fit together into one.
Yeah, well, in my little woodworking world, I know how much had to go into any of these pieces in here. And it's always impresses me that they would go to that much time and energy, talent, just for a magic trick,
Yeah.
just to fool someone.
I know
And
you
so
wonder
you can appreciate
how many lifetimes are represented in that apparatus.
Yeah,
How many careers are represented.
right. And if the piece could only tell a story, they
Yeah.
all have wonderful stories with them. It's just wonderful. And of course, what drew me to it also was the craftsmanship and the quality of a hand-built piece. So much of this stuff, while they came from a manufacturer, especially European ones, there's still so much handwork into it, even though they might be making a half a dozen of these pieces around here. There's still so much handwork in that this vase is not quite the same as this vase, and they all kind of do it different. So
right. I mean, it's always interesting to me that that in talking to you about this stuff, you can pick up a turned piece and say, "Oh, Carl Owen turned that," or Floyd Thayer turned that, because you can see things about it. I mean, I can't, but you can see their characteristics. It's like a signature, isn't it? It's like a handwriting.
Yeah, right. It's got its own signature to it, even though it's not written. So,
right, and those guys are literally standing there with a tool, making each one of those individually, just like they would be writing it out by hand. So, those personalities are really represented in all that apparatus.
Yeah, and you bring up Floyd Thayer, which is, I'm not sure it's in the picture, but cabinet back there, and there are people that knew Floyd and used to go over to the shop, of course, when he's working, and he had the ability to do these complex things on a lathe and carry on a conversation with the person there, even though the chips are flying here and you're waiting for the thing to blow up in your face. So how they do that, I don't know.
I know that cabinet all the way in the back with the big red ball in the middle of it. I'll just explain. I know Genii readers have seen various things taken from that cabinet. That's all Thayer apparatus. Is that right? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, all early Thayer.
All early Thayer, and
mostly,
probably turned by Thayer. Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, Floyd Thayer, to me, was what I call a folk artist, in that he's influenced by the beauty of European magic apparatus, mostly made out of brass that has been nickel plated and polished and in the catalogs. And he being an expert wood turner himself, he copied these metal pieces only out of wood. Right. And so it's just like a folk artist would do nowadays. This is his version of their masterpiece.
Yeah.
And it all has the hand of Thayer in it, but it's his own way of performing the same trick from Europe.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's really beautiful, and it's interesting that it works on all those levels, all at the same time, and then also is fooling people. Not all those tricks were massive foolers, but but like all dealer tricks, there were some great tricks and then some that were just pretty to look at. But
Yeah, well,
I will
you're
let
right.
that be the all-time tease for our Genii readers. You can look around that room and look at that stuff behind John, and those are many of those pieces. Some of those pieces are going to be upcoming pieces in the Chamber of Secrets, and you'll see another one in a couple months. So we'll see you in the
Yeah, and
pages.
a lot of them have been in there in the past.
Right, right.
We've been doing the Chamber of Secrets now for quite a few years, so um, there's still stuff
I know, and
to look at.
you're not running out. Of course, you're making some at the same time, but I don't think you're making them fast enough to stay ahead of it. No, it's great. It's great. And thanks for taking us through that amazing prop and letting us have a look at it in person. As again, people can see photographs of it in the March Genii and the story of the light and heavy chest. Thanks, John.
Well,
We'll see you soon.
thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so this is Noah Levine, who, if you don't know him and you haven't seen him perform or you haven't met him at Tannen's, he is now our new magic editor at Genii Magazine. And it turns out that the second issue had Noah jumping through hoops. It somehow was an issue full of stuff for him, full of wonderful surprises for him, right from the cover story, which he did, to some really amazing surprises in our magic department. So I asked if he would be willing to talk to us a little about that and how that all came together. Let's start with the cover because, of course, Helen Coghlan is a great story, and it's an amazing story when you put it all together of what she's managed to do on Fool Us.
She's amazing, and it's been such a delight to get to revisit and watch all her appearances on Fool Us and learn a little more about her and her father Arthur and how those performances came to be. She's just very different from a lot of other people you encounter in magic because, the first one of the first things she said to me was that her main reason for doing those appearances is just she wanted to call attention to her dad and his work and kind of keep his mind active. And you watch her and she's fooling Penn and Teller more thoroughly than almost anybody else who's been on that show and just does it with such effortlessness. And even though she does kind of needle them about it, it feels very good natured. And the magic is incredibly clever. I've gotten to have a little peek behind the curtain at it, and you know, there's always that thing when you realize you've been fooled even harder than you thought you were, because there's so many little details that it didn't even occur in my case, to think about, especially with escapes. So it was exciting to get to write a little bit about her.
Yeah, I would say as an old guy, speaking on behalf of her father, I would say that I really appreciate that what's happening is that there's a huge amount of magic knowledge and different styles coming in there. And it fools us because we just don't expect those things to be mixed in that way today. But it takes someone who really understood all that and has been using that all this time. So it's quite an achievement. And that brings us to the tricks in the March issue, which is a really interesting, I think, a really interesting mix of material. And I think readers are really going to appreciate it and be surprised by a lot of it.
It's a heck of a combination, this issue.
We're starting with Magicana, and that's from R. Paul Wilson.
Yes, sir. R. Paul Wilson, who that's a name I think everybody knows for lots of reasons now, just multi-talented guy, and he has a really clean coins to glass routine described in the sort of classic Richard Kaufman fashion, with immaculate detail and nice line drawings, so you can sort of imagine that your hands are there doing it. But it's a really clean version of the trick that combines some very interesting technical stuff that allows you to get a really good look in the way that you're holding the glass, so you don't get this sort of classic, nothing wrong with it, but just a way of getting away from this look. A very bold ploy near the end that will make you laugh. And yeah, just the whole thing is feels like a very cohesive portrait of how Paul likes to handle his magic and go after an effect.
Yeah, it's a really
Right.
great routine. And
That's a really good thing.
really look at it. Even if you don't do a lot of coins, I think it's a really interesting routine to analyze kind of how it's all put together.
especially if you don't do a lot of coins, because then you don't have to master this, going through the fingers thing. You get to just do it once and not have to make it perfect, but you still get to learn a lot of lessons from it.
Right, right. Yeah, really smart. And then David Riegel's back. Of course, David's a favorite in Genii, and he's got an amazing stand-up routine, I think, this month.
The more I think about it, the more it kind of feels like he may have cracked the game wide open. He found a way of I'm still not sure like how much we talk about method, but found a very, very clever method, and he's worked out all the performance details. This is something I believe he performed at the parlor
Right.
of the castle, and it allows you to do a lot of things. He uses it for a kind of prediction effect, but man, I can imagine using it for a more classic sympathetic cards routine. But yeah, the more I think about it, and that's sort of the classic David Riegel experience where you realize that if you put the time into this principle he's figured out, you could really have a very strong piece on your hands. Um,
Yeah, I mean, he handles apparatus really, really cleverly. And by apparatus, little simple, little elegant things that he's just extracting so much out of it during those routines. And I think this is a really great example of that again. Yeah.
yeah, I believe he said that he actually constructed the or came up with this because he came up with this challenge for himself that he wanted to do a magic trick where he built a gimmick in front of the audience. Obviously, not with them not knowing about it, and so it's exciting that it comes from that place of experimentation. And when you initially sent this to me to sort of figure out is this the right issue for it, or what? First thing I did was I looked at the requirements, and you need a gift box, a bag, tissue paper, two straight-sided glasses, a piece of mylar with adhesive backing, two blue decks of cards, a matching red, and I said, okay, it's in. I don't even need to read the trick. That's
Right,
great.
right.
But we can't take credit for that, as you said, because David's been part of Genie for a long time, and it's exciting that we get to keep getting more of this stuff from him.
He has been figuring out the formula for a long time. But a new person to our page is Sarah Rodriguez.
Yeah. Sarah is a new person to our pages, and I believe this is her first time publishing anything in English.
Oh, wow.
And maybe at all. I'm not sure, but I believe in English. And if anyone had seen her at all, she came on the scene a bunch of years ago doing this thing called Spock Aces, which is a very technical ace location using table pharaohs. And that was sort of the last I'd heard about her, and you called my attention to her, and she's been really busy. She's got a kind of theater company in Spain called Magia and La Manga, and they do a lot of performances, and she's been doing a lot of things on Instagram. She's just on Fool Us, and she has contributed this collector's routine that is a true knuckle buster.
Yeah.
It really is like chunky fun to work on. But it's also very direct. There's nothing wasted. It is using uh, what we now call Ray Cosby's sort of adaptation of Fred Robinson, Ambitious Riser, to get just this very sharp, fast collector's routine that, as I think about it now, actually avoids a lot of the maybe less challenging, but just kind of vagueness that a lot of collectors' routines require because there's a lot of displacing and whatnot. And this is just like it's a zippy piece of magic. And it also gives a sense she's got a great wit, which is kind of fun to read on the page, and also just has a lot of thoughts about uh, kind of designing magic and how exactly should it look when cards are selected and put back, not from a method point of view, but just from a kind of how does this piece come together. And so again, as with Paul Wilson, as with Regal, I think it's a very cohesive picture of what her magic looks like, and I'm excited to see more after this one.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because I think readers will find that even through the translation, you get a sense of her and a little bit of her attitude. And it's really fun to read, and especially in such a technical trick, where she kind of steps back and comments on things that are happening.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a lot of fun. And then, strangest of all, and I can't even begin to explain this, but you can, is Blake Vogt jumping into these pages with a really, really interesting, I don't know, is the word experiment?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And I think he would want us to say that. I think it's an important part of this experiment is that people know that, and that's what makes it fun. Um, Blake, you'd been in touch with him and he'd had some excitement about doing some things for the magazine. And, we know that the issue just in general with a magazine is a polished working piece of magic with all the details and beats figured out can take, years and years and years to develop. And it's not necessarily and then when someone does have that, they don't necessarily want to just then give all that away in a magazine. They want it for themselves. And so it's a challenge of what kinds of things are you going to share. And so Blake, who is a great magician and a great inventor and builder, particularly with paper, he's just amazing. And has worked for many years as a consultant with a lot of uh, named magicians, both for live shows and TV. He came up with this premise where um, I think we're gonna try to do this monthly. We'll see. We'll see where it lands, depending on how busy he gets. But we're gonna try to do it once a month, where he will do either in person or like a Zoom an hour-long session with a different person who he either knows or someone who he's kind of wanted an excuse to get in touch with. Not necessarily a magician. Some of the people on his list are people who are sort of magic adjacent, but not
Understood.
magicians.
Yeah,
And in the course of an hour, they will invent a magic trick, and hopefully it will be great. It might be cool.
yeah,
And as he said, if it's, we'll figure it out no matter what.
right.
But the important thing is, I think it should give us a great magic trick. And in this first one that they're calling Ring Seat, I think it's a very good, clean vanish of a ring that sort of sets you up nicely for a full kind of ring and nest of boxes, ring flight type effect. But this is, I think, a really excellent vanish with a tactile moment to it. It's very reminiscent of the more traditional thing where you put a bill or a ring under a handkerchief and they hold it and you whisk it away. It's also kind of reminiscent of the coin fold that everybody learns in their first magic book.
Mhm.
And so he's going to invent this thing with a person, and then we do a write-up of it with pictures, as with anything in a magazine, and then a little snippet of that conversation so that we can see how it came about. In this particular month, he did it with Daniel Garcia, who's also just equally the two of them together. And this, we'll have a link to the full video so you can really see them chip away at this thing. But the two of them together and hearing the creative energy bouncing back and forth in attacking this problem of just coming up with something whole cloth in the course of an hour is really exciting. And I think it's a one of Blake's biggest strengths is just that ability to fearlessly jump in because I know that it's a challenge, right? We kind of get stuck doing, and actually, it's not a magic trick, but Patrick Davis has this essay in the magazine called Learn a Fourth Trick that is partially about that thing of getting stuck with a kind of smaller repertoire. And what's really exciting about Blake is, again, just his ability to not get stuck in that place and just jump in and start experimenting with new ideas and then close them out. I think that's an important part of this is not just saying what if, but saying what if and then bringing it down into something manageable. And what you'll see from this conversation is their initial plan was to come up with a kind of uh, nest of envelopes or next nest of boxes style effect. And then they almost accidentally came to this premise for a vanish that ended up being the completed idea.
Right. I
So
mean, they take a right turn and that's the solution. It's really
yeah,
clever.
but so that was really exciting to see develop and put together, and um, it's interesting because in working with him on it, I made a version of the gimmick just so I could make sure I was following along, and I thought I did an okay job. And then a week or so later, he sent over pictures, and he's truly an artist. You
Mhm.
look at this gimmick he invented up close, a thing he invented in such a short period of time, and it looks like, a piece of origami or something like that.
Yeah.
It's just so precisely made. And so I'm pretty pumped about what I'm excited about all the material, but definitely curious to see what this is going to look like over the course of some months.
I think that's a really good point. I think one of the mistakes we all make is, well, I'm biased about this, but I think magicians, settle too quickly for really comfortable material. And by comfortable material, I mean, well worn. And we tell ourselves that's just fine. I'll do the egg bag, I'll do the cut and restored rope. And
Totally.
I think these are really great examples of pushing the door open and getting a new feeling in and a new breeze in. And Blake's a great example of that. So that's inspiring.
Yeah. And to your point, I do think that's a big part of what you want from, your monthly magazine with magic in it, is something that kind of brings a breeze in and just reminds you that it's the same way you feel when you go to a lecture or a convention or meet with a handful of magic friends. It's just something to remind you that there are people coming up with new ideas all the time and finding a way to make it work for them. Um, I, Something I've been thinking about a lot is the way that so much magic advertising and dialogue these days, and I'm sure we'll have some of it in the magazine. It's very utilitarian. The number of ads I see that say, this is going to be your new closer, or this is going to be your new opener, I, as a performer, I totally understand the value of that. But if you're an 11-year-old kid learning magic for the first time, that doesn't need to be your number one priority. And same thing for yeah, so I think it's just important to remember that this stuff is fun and exciting and doesn't always need to fill this specific hole in your repertoire immediately. This
Right.
is uh, it's a form of play. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the dealers define our art, for better or worse. So occasionally it's for better, and very often it's worse. But we're all in thrall of the dealers. They tell us what to do. They tell us what to perform. They tell us when to change to a new piece. And sadly, that's been true for over a century. But that's my thing of reading that. And I think we still do it. We still do it much too much. We look to them. We look to them ultimately for inspirations, and what that involves is what can we buy. But anyway, that's fantastic. Hey, this has been a great month for Magic. Thanks, Noah.
you got it.
Thanks for putting you on the spot at the last minute after finishing all this stuff up.
Yep.
But we'll see you again soon, and keep up the good work.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye.